Happy New Year, everyone! Let's kick things off with some more obscure old racing games. Today, I'll be taking a look at a game called Midnight Racing, also known as Midnight Racing Long Night. Not to be confused with the other Midnight Racing, or Midnight Club, or the countless other budget racing games with Midnight in the title. Interestingly, unlike most of these other games, Midnight Racing is not a blatant Midnight Club ripoff. In fact, I'm pretty sure it predates the original Midnight Club Street Racing. I couldn't find an exact release date, but sources online place it sometime between 1999 and 2002. This game was developed by a small team in Finland, and then published by a company in Sweden, who then licensed it out to other publishers for release in other regions. So that's probably responsible for the discrepancy in release dates, as well as the multiple titles. I'm pretty sure that 1999 is the year of the original release, because this game is featured on an archive of the developer's website from January 2000. It also has 3DFX glide support, which had kinda fallen out of favor by 2002. It's for this reason that I'm going to be playing it on the Windows 98 Dell desktop I repaired in another video a while back. Upon starting the game, we get dropped straight into one of the most late 90s menus I've ever seen. That font! These icons, the low-res stock image backgrounds, this all screams turn of the millennium office decor. And just listen to that funky bit-crushed music. This menu has a mood. The menu items all wobble around, and everything uses these overly elaborate transitions. This is already more production value than I would have expected from a budget PC title, and we have yet to see any gameplay, so I've got high hopes here. Unfortunately, I'm not quite as impressed with the settings menu. To start with, there are no resolution options. We're stuck at 640 by 480 full screen. There are a bunch of different options for controllers, but none of them allow for input remapping, which gets to be a problem when you realize that this game has accelerate mapped to up on every controller. I originally wanted to play this with a gamepad, but holding up on the D-pad at all times is not very conducive to steering. I ultimately found that just using a keyboard is the least bad option, which for a racing game is not ideal. It's also getting really annoying having to wait for these menu transitions every single time. As for the racing part of this racing game, it's structured similarly to the very first Need for Speed title. There's a small selection of cars, with 2 of them being locked at the start of the game. There are 10 tracks in total, all of which are point-to-point races along open road. They're all available right from the get-go to be raced individually, or you can enter a championship and go through them all in order. This is all pretty basic stuff for a racing game, but it's presented fairly well and plays somewhat decently. I say somewhat decently because while the driving mostly controls okay, the handling is a tad on the heavy side and things are a little bit stiff. It can be a little difficult to make tight turns and last-second adjustments. The turning radius is wider than it needs to be, and the draw distance is kinda low, so keeping an eye on the mini-map is essential if you want to stay on the track. Not helping matters is the fact that drifting isn't really a thing in this game. Oh, you can hit the brake while turning to be sure, but the game doesn't really acknowledge it beyond slowing the car down ever so slightly. I suspect this stems from a limitation of the controls. It's not exactly possible to hit the gas and brake at the same time on a gamepad or joystick when they're bound to up and down respectively. So the game just doesn't account for it. If you do go off-road, which will happen eventually, your car becomes nearly impossible to control. Not helping matters is the lack of a reverse button, which can lead to situations like this. The vehicle movement in this game is all physics-based, which is pretty impressive for the time, but the tech just isn't quite there yet. As soon as the physics engine has to contend with anything other than normal flat road, maneuvering becomes a little less than predictable. Damn, look at that wreck. This game uses a soft body damage model, which I did not expect. Every vehicle in this game deforms dynamically when hit. This is so far beyond the level of effort I expected from this game that I am honestly shocked. No joke, I was so surprised by this the first time it happened that I literally just sat there staring in disbelief at my twisted wreck of a car for a good minute before I reset. This damage system is absolutely the best thing about Midnight Racing, and discovering it completely changed how I approached this game. My strategy became less about trying to win by driving well, and more about just outlasting my opponents by avoiding wrecks. The wrecks aren't all or nothing either. It's possible to take a fair bit of damage and keep going, which is super cool to see in a game this old. The same physics, movement, and damage model is applied to your opponents and AI traffic as well, so a good part of the challenge is in dodging the wrecks that they inevitably create. You can even intentionally wreck out your opponents with enough skill. I'm not sure if that's something the designers intended, but the dynamic nature of this game's systems allow for it, and it can be a viable strategy in some rare instances. Midnight Racing honestly feels like it could be an early prototype for the Burnout series, which is not a sentence I expected to say when I started work on this video. Now, this damage system is far from perfect. Sometimes stuff like this happens. Sometimes your car just dissolves into an abstract mess of polygons. Between the wrecks and the wonky physics, this whole experience is rather janky, and way more difficult than it reasonably should be. I put about 5 hours into this game for this video, and I have not managed to place first in one single race yet, even on the easiest difficulty. Every time I think I might be able to win, I end up getting stuck on something, or losing control on a corner, or getting blindsided by the weird AI traffic. Even so, this kind of stuff is super impressive for 1999, and I was shocked that I hadn't heard of this game before now. After looking more into the developer though, I learned that maybe I shouldn't be all that surprised. Midnight Racing was primarily developed by a company called Twilight 3D, who aren't game developers in the traditional sense. Their main product is actually 3D rendering software. In this context, Midnight Racing was developed not only as a game to be sold directly, but also as a tech demo to generate sales for the game engine with which it was made. That would explain the discrepancy between this game's budget release status and the relatively high level of polish and technical wizardry on display. On a related note, Inca Gold, the co-developer and original publisher of Midnight Racing, seems to have criminally undersold it. The dynamic physics and damage systems aren't mentioned anywhere in the marketing copy or shown in any of the official screenshots. Instead, we get bullet points hyping up features like the existence of 4-way intersections and 12 camera angles, half of which render the game unplayable, by the way. They even do the thing where they lie about the total number of vehicles by counting each individual color combination as a separate car. It's like they went out of their way to make this game sound as cheap and generic as possible, and not highlight any of the features that would have made it unique at the time. I'm just saying, there might be a reason Inca Gold is no longer in business. Now, this is where I was gonna start wrapping up this video, but then while writing the script, I discovered that Midnight Racing got a sequel. Well, kind of. It's really more of an updated re-release with a different coat of paint. Let's take a look at it real quick. You can tell this game came out around the time Grand Theft Auto got big, because it's called Hotwired, and now the cars you drive are canonically stolen. The gameplay changes made here are actually really interesting. You race on all the same tracks, but now the goal is to outrun the cops in order to sell off the stolen vehicle you're driving. It's an interesting premise to be sure, but in a better game, I feel like this would have just been an alternate mode. It really doesn't justify a standalone release. I did have a bit more fun with this game than I did with Midnight Racing though, if only because being tailed by the cops through the whole level keeps the tension up, especially when they start coming at you head on. Hotwired feels even more like a Burnout prototype than Midnight Racing did, specifically for the marked man events in Burnout Paradise, where you have to outrun a group of aggressive rivals. Unfortunately, the more engaging gameplay is offset by how quickly it tends to frustrate. Unlike Midnight Racing, your car has to make it all the way to the end in one piece so it can be sold off. If you wreck out, there's no option to reset. You have to replay the entire race from the beginning. This is fine in the early levels, but as the game goes on, the tracks get longer and more treacherous. The final few courses can take upwards of 10 minutes to complete, and are full of tight turns and narrow straightaways. Between the course design, stiff controls, and janky physics, it's basically impossible to finish the later levels without wrecking at least once or twice. By about the halfway point, these stages become functionally unbeatable for all but the most committed players due to their length. I myself gave up on the 4th track. After 5 failed attempts that took upwards of 3 minutes each, I'd made it nearly to the end, and the game decided to throw this at me. This is some BS right here. Any game that demands flawless runs through long levels like this should not rely on dynamic systems where this kind of crap can happen at random. I don't even have the option to try out the later stages, because unlike in Midnight Racing, they're locked off until you beat the earlier ones. Speaking of the tracks, the developers of Hotwired decided to retroactively base them off real-world locations. Apparently, these indistinct stretches of highway, which just had numbers in Midnight Racing, are all supposed to be set in major US cities now. They've also changed up the vehicle roster, though most of the new additions are just repurposed AI traffic vehicles from Midnight Racing. I never did figure out how to unlock the 2 additional vehicles in Midnight Racing. Here though, it's much more straightforward. You just buy new vehicles with the money you get from the ones you sell off. Each car has a fixed maximum value you can sell it for, so logically, the cars you buy should have a sale value proportional to their price. But they don't. The one car I saved up enough to unlock, which was not the cheapest one available by the way, somehow earns me less money than either of the 2 cars that I started the game with. This is some truly baffling design. They also added voiceover clips, I guess to add some additional narrative context, and they are truly ridiculous. Just have a listen.
I have some clients looking for a new car. If you can deliver the car to me across the county line in time, I will reward you handsomely.
There's a total of 4 clips of this muddled, exaggerated gangster voice, and you'll be hearing them constantly. Half the time you can't even understand them because the mixing in this game is horrible. Never mind the late 90s audio compression.
Now that you got it, let's see if you can make it across the county line. Don't let the cops catch you. You're gonna get paid.
This is the best kind of terrible. I need to move on from Hotwired though, because believe it or not, there is yet another version of this game. This time it's called Night Race, and it's completely identical to Midnight Racing. The only difference being that the total number of tracks has been increased from 10 to 30. I tried out a couple of the new stages, and it's just more of the same never-ending highways. I can just imagine how tedious it must be to play through the entire 30-course championship in this game, when getting through the original 10 courses in Midnight Racing was bad enough on its own. Seriously, a good quarter of my playtime with this game was spent just driving along empty highway with nothing much going on. Though that raises the question, if it's just a longer version of Midnight Racing, why does this game even exist? Well, from what I can tell, Inca Gold made several different variants of Midnight Racing, and then licensed them all out to a bunch of no-name publishers all across the world. Inca Gold is often miscredited as the sole developer of these games as a result. Midnight Racing was being rebranded and resold by God knows how many tiny no-name companies until at least 2004. The Hotwired variant alone was also sold as Speed Thief and 40 Seconds in different regions under different publishers. And I've even found evidence that Midnight Racing was given away in cereal boxes at one point. If anyone knows of any other versions or alternate titles for this game that I missed, let me know down in the comments. Surprisingly, both Midnight Racing and Speed Thief are being sold digitally to this day, exclusively on Gamersgate of all places. And to my surprise, these games work just fine on Windows 10. I can't really say they're worth the $10 a pop asking price. This entire inbred family of games is far more interesting from a technical and historical perspective than it is to actually experience. Outside of the impressive for the time wrecks and janky physics, these games are honestly kinda boring. The tracks all look nearly identical and get stupid long towards the end. I'd say the Hotwired / Speed Thief / 40 Seconds version is the best variant of this game, if only because the moment-to-moment gameplay is slightly more engaging, and there's an actual sense of progression. Really though, I don't think I can fully recommend any of these, despite them having slightly higher production value than most low-budget PC titles. With that, I think the best way to end this video is with a compilation of all the weird glitches and wrecks I ran into while playing these games. Enjoy! Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. I've got other videos up on screen that are similar to this, so maybe go check those out. I think that's everything. Bye.